where feet can't usually wander. We can keep our head above the water. We can scale mountains. We can overcome things that we didn't realize we could come through the power that is at work within us to accomplish abundantly far more than we could ask or imagine. We're not limited in our imagination. We're not limited by what we can ask for. Sometimes the most we can do in prayer is sighs too deep for words. Sometimes we don't even have the words to articulate what it is that we need, where we need to go. And yet this power, beyond what we can ask or imagine, to God be the glory. So I want to explore this power this morning. Possibility is a conversation that's out in the culture. There are hundreds of self-help workshops that teach us how to live the life of our dreams, that take us to the possibilities that are beyond we can imagine. We can think of all the incredible language that's used to describe possibility. And I want to be clear this morning that we're talking about a different conversation this morning. First of all, this is a power, a possibility that happens outside the framework of capitalism. Capitalism has a particular way of understanding possibility. Possibility is always competitive. Possibility is always about winning the race that others will then lose. It's always about getting the position that others then will not get. It's about having more than other people. It's about being recognized as more worthy than other people. So the first thing I want to invite us to think about in this conversation is that it's a conversation about cooperation. This is a cooperative possibility. This is a communal possibility. It's a collective possibility. It's not just an individual possibility. And then second, at the very heart of this possibility is connection. Connection with God, divine connection. Ephesians couldn't be clearer that the possibility emanates from God's power which is within us. This is not a possibility that is only about the great talents we have, although that's part of it, because this power enlivens and engages the gifts that God has given us. But this power is intimately connected to the power of God within us. And then thirdly, this is a conversation. It's a faith conversation. It's a communal possibility. It's something we want to talk about as a group. It's not just something that we dream about at night. It's not a private dream that we keep in our journals that we hope someday will come true. It's a communal possibility that is engaged and comes to fruition through faith conversation. So we're going to look this morning at the cooperative nature of this possibility, at the connectional, divine connectional nature of this possibility, and also at the conversational element of this possibility. So first of all, let's look at how different this is than the way we might normally think about possibility. In our competitive society, possibility usually, oftentimes, whether we recognize it or not, whether it's stated or not, often pits us against one another, because possibility is often about somebody rising above the others. So this possibility is first of all about releasing ourselves from the competition. The book of Acts describes the early Christian church. In the second chapter, in the 42nd, 43rd, 44th verse, we see this image, which is then repeated again in the 4th chapter, of the early Christian church. They had all things in common. And the people sold their possessions and made sure that nobody was out. And they held all things in common, and they ate together and they prayed together. Now this is such a prominent characteristic of the early Christian community that it's repeated again in the 4th chapter, but we don't see it as the history of the faith moves on so much. There are always those groups that attempt to live Christianity in community. That's always a part because it's such a central value. But it's also a very difficult value. And it's a value that easily kind of disappears in the wake of the overwhelming competitive nature of the society we live in. So oftentimes, even in the church, this competitive nature seeps in. I remember when I was first getting ready to start New Day Church, and I felt like I was stepping out upon the ocean, that I was walking where feet will not usually wander, because I had no idea what that was going to be like. And so I began to attend conferences, New Church Start conferences. And at that time, and I think it's probably still true for the most part, the conservative evangelicals have the total hold on the market of New Church Start. That's where the energy is. So that's where I ended up, at a huge Baptist church in Orlando, Florida. And all the big names were there, the big mega church heroes of white evangelicalism, Bill Hybels and the purpose-driven people, and all these kind of folks who have, are big in the media and have tens and 20s of thousands of people coming out to their churches on Sunday. And it was a very testosterone-fueled conversation. It was had a very capitalistic feel to it. It was, you can just imagine what it looked like and what it felt like. And I felt very much at sea there. I felt like an alien in this gathering. I tried to have a few conversations with people and never got more than 2 sentences in. I had such a different vision of the gospel than most of the people. I really spent 3 or 4 days not talking to anybody, even though I was trying to talk to people because I was interested. I was there. I realized that the vision we had for New Day was completely different than the vision of the gospel they had, but I still wanted to learn the method. I wanted to learn how it was done. If they were bringing thousands into their movement, I wanted to bring thousands into our movement. I wanted to know what the magic was, what the formula was. And so I went to the workshops and I learned, and we actually launched New Day along the model of what they call the big launch. That was the model I chose. And we did, we had 150 people out the first Sunday, and we had 32 out the second, and we had 30 out the third, and about 29 out the fourth. It was not a sustainable model for us. It was not what we were doing. And I began to realize that it's not just the content that matters, it's also the form that matters. It also matters how we do what we do, not just what we think we're doing. It's not just the content of what we're trying to do, but it's also the way we go about it. And I think back to that conference, and Bill Hybels, who many have probably heard of, the father of this megachurch white evangelical movement, gave the closing for this conference. And it was very moving, and I was moved. And I came up to the altar and gave myself to this church planting vision, because he had a way of articulating the gospel that's very powerful. And really, in some ways, it's more liberal than many. Was one of the ones who has really brought women into leadership, which is unusual in those circles. But then I think, this year, here he is. I don't know how many have seen the news or would even care, but here he is resigning because of years of the Me Too movement has hit the megachurch movement, and there are women, many women who have come forward and talked about the abuse and the harassment within this church, and he's resigned, and the whole board is, mea culpa and all that. Not only the indiscretions, not only the moral failures, but the structures we set up, where we put people up on a pedestal and we give them ridiculous amounts of power, because our vision of possibility is so rooted in these charismatic all-stars that somehow rise above the masses and become untouchable. And structures of power that can't touch them. Not only these indiscretions began to be known, but the elder board would always overlook it and put it to the side and not deal with it because there was so much more important things going on. And so how do we reorient our whole understanding of possibility so that it's not in this competitive superstar kind of model, but it's more cooperative, collective leadership, collective possibility, collective communication? This is something that we're doing together. We've seen this over and again in our political movements, in our grassroots movements, in our nonprofit movements, and certainly in the church. That what Ephesians is calling us to is a power that's within all of us. We're not to be singled out. This is a collective power that resides in us because it's the power of God, and it's in all of us. So as we move then into a connection with this power, this is critical. To engage this possibility is not just to engage our own talents and gifts and passion and persistence and perseverance, but it's also to connect with this power of God that's within us. So as we begin to move in that direction, how do we as faith community begin to connect? You know, sometimes we think this diminishes us. I was having a conversation with a young person not too long ago, and I was talking to them about the faith questions that are emerging for them at this point in their life. And one of the questions that this young person raised with me was, how is it that we can be special if God loves all of us? You know, how do I get to be special if God just loves all of us? And, you know, that's one thing I think that our capitalist society has really drilled into us, that you got to be somehow, you know, different than, better than, in order to be fully unique and powerful. No, the love of God channels through us in many unique ways. The way that that love gets brought into the world, the impact that that love makes, the particular ways that it touches us is unique, because God has created each of us in very unique ways. But that doesn't mean it has to be competitive. It doesn't mean that some have to rise above others. This is uniquely a cooperative spirit, and the love that we have, the self-esteem, you know, I think this is one of the reasons our self-esteem gets off track. You know, we think about, for example, you know, who am I to, let's say that you feel called to write a book, and you just really have this thing that you're called to write about. You have this unique perspective on something, and you just really feel like you are called to write a book. But you begin to get this idea in your mind that I don't think I can do that. You know, what happens if I put all this energy into this thing, and, you know, I get to a certain point and I'm in it 6 months, a year, or whatever, and then it just doesn't come together, and I can't get it to come together, I can't finish it, it just seems like an overwhelming project. And then what if I do get it together and nobody wants to read it? Why would anyone want to read, you know, and so all these doubts come in. And I think that comes in many different projects that we take on, you know, whether it's a job or a relationship. And it also comes in other kinds of situations that are overwhelming to us. It could be a health situation, or a fear situation, or a loved one that's going through something really difficult, and we feel like it's our time to step up and be with them, but we're just not sure we can do it. The teaching is that all of us have the power of God within us. And the power of God can take us to places, can lead us through things, can help us do things that we don't know that we can do ourselves. This is the teaching in Exodus, when Moses is called to lead the people to liberation. And Moses' first question is, who am I to go to Pharaoh? Who am I to lead my people? What if I go to my people and they say, who are you? What are you doing? And there's a self-esteem issue. There's a questioning. I don't know that I'm worthy. I don't know that I can do this. And God does not respond in that text by saying, oh, you can do it. You're stronger than you think you are, Moses. Let me give you a few techniques that will help you to win people and please others. Let me give you some conversation. You know, no, God says, I will be with you. That's the only thing, the only response God makes to Moses' feelings of doubt and fear and being overwhelmed. I will be with you. So this connection then becomes a faith conversation. And this is where we've been going this month. Faith is a conversation. It's always a conversation. In the story of Moses, it's a conversation between Moses and God. It's not an edict. It's not a doctrine. It's not something that just gets dumped down on us and believe it or perish in hell. That's not the way faith works. There's a conversation. Moses says, who am I to do this? God says, I'm going to be with you. Moses says, well, who are you? God says, I am who I am. Moses says, well, what if I go to the people and I say, God sent me? Will they believe me? And God says, I will be with you. And Moses is, finally Moses gets on his donkey and goes. But it's not like God's saying, you either go or I'm going to turn you into an incinerated bush. It's a conversation. Faith is a conversation. It's something that is within us. It's a power that's within us that God has stirred up. And as we open ourselves to that conversation, we move together along the path. A couple of weeks ago, Alexis had a powerful spiritual experience during worship. And I think many of us were feeling the power of the Spirit. It was very palpable in the room. You could sense it. And a few days later, Alexis and I were talking about that experience. And he shared with me that one thing, and I asked him if I could share this, so don't think that I'm going to share your secrets. I will not share a secret if I don't ask you, if I don't talk to you about it first. He did say, anyway. But what he said is the Spirit was moving very powerfully, but what I got in that conversation with God in that moment, what really allowed that powerful healing, transforming experience to happen in my life is that I invited it. I had to invite it. I had to give some gesture, some affirmation that I was willing to receive it. And that was a powerful conversation for me because it reminded me of my own experience, that it's oftentimes only when I've been willing to assent to the movement of the Spirit that the Spirit has come in and touched me, that the Spirit is not a dictator. The Spirit is not authoritarian. The Spirit is communal. The Spirit connects with us and invites us to invite it in. As we talk with one another about our authentic faith experiences, we can be edified. We can get an idea of new ways that we might want to try to connect with the Spirit. Because Ephesians is clear that it's this connection with the Spirit that allows us to experience the possibility. I pray that you may have the power to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge. I pray that you will have the power to comprehend with all the saints. This is a communal passage. This is speaking to the community of faith. This is not, I pray that you, particular chosen one, will have the power to comprehend this special knowledge so that you can rise up in leadership in the community. No, it's I pray that you will comprehend together with all the saints. Now, this is language which means all the members of the faith community, all those who are on this journey. That in community, in conversation, working together, action and reflection, taking risks and praying and reflecting on how God is moving among the community. That you will be able to comprehend the breadth, the length, and the height, and the depth. We talk about the length of our years. We're all going to live out the length of our years. We don't know how long will be the length of our years. And as we get farther along the length of our years, we begin to wonder more often how long our years will be. But here's a possibility that we can live more than the length of our years. We can also live the breadth of our years and the height and the depth. There is so much more going on than aging. There's so many more possibilities happening than what may meet the eye or may be in our consciousness at any given point. There is so much more going on, so much more possibility. You know, even as we begin to discover nature and begin to realize what's happening in one little drop of water, as we begin to realize the magnitude of the universe, when we are able to open our minds to what's happening, to what the possibilities really are in the universe, we can be overwhelmed. We can have our minds boggled, and that's exactly what God is hoping. I pray that you may have the power to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth, the length, the height, the depth, to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge. We get ourselves in situations we don't think we can handle. We get overwhelmed with fear. We get overwhelmed with doubt. We're not sure we can take a step forward. We don't know what's next. And this passage, I think, is telling us you don't even know the half of it. You're not even. Take a step and see what happens. Talk with your faith community. Get in conversation with your sisters and brothers and siblings in the faith. Take a step together and see what happens. Now to God, who by power at work within us is able to accomplish abundantly far more than we can ask or imagine. I love this part. More than we can ask or imagine. We're afraid to imagine stuff because we think it'll be too wild and could never happen. This is like, no, you're not even getting started yet. What you're imagining isn't even the beginning of what can happen. You know, we're in this transition time at our church, and that brings up all kinds of emotions and feelings. And just in the last couple of weeks, we've taken some huge steps. We voted 26-1 as a congregation with 7 abstentions that we're going to move out beyond the United Methodist Church. Now that's in some ways a scary proposition. It's a big step to take, but it's something that overwhelmingly our congregation has felt that we must do at this time. This is what we're called to do. We have at the same time looked at our financial situation, and we talked about we need to raise $75,000 by next spring, above what we're already giving. And many of us are giving generously because we've been through this before, haven't we? Right? We've been at this place before. It was 4 or 5 years ago we came to this place. And every time we come to this place, people step up. Every time we come to this place that feels like it's scarcity, people step up, and all of a sudden we're experiencing an abundance that is far beyond what we realized was there. And again, just in the last 2 weeks, we had this Connecting Council meeting 2 weeks ago, and just in the last 2 weeks since we put that out, 18 people have stepped up with an additional more than $10,000 between now and the end of December. So that's in 2 weeks. Now that's a quarter of the way we need to get by the end of December. But it just illustrates, and this is the principle, because it's not even about, you know, the dollars and cents. It's about the principle that when we step up, when we give ourselves in faith, you know, if the more that we move closer to God, the more that we accept and connect with the power of God that was within us, the more that we begin to live by that, the more that we allow that to be a priority for us, because we got so many other things happening in our lives, so many other things calling us this way and that way. The more we can make this a priority in our lives, the more we can center this. It is absolutely mind-boggling. We haven't even begun to see the kinds of things that God has called New Day Church in this community, this faith community, to be a part of. We haven't even begun to get into the deep water yet. We're just in a couple of inches. We're invited to get into 25, 30, 50 feet. And you know the ocean's a lot deeper than that. I remember a time when Nora and I were in the Philippines, and we were snorkeling. And we were snorkeling along a shelf. You ever seen these shelves in the ocean? So on my right eye was looking at water 5 feet deep. And my left eye was looking at water God knows how deep. I mean, it could have been 1,000 feet for all I know. I certainly couldn't see the bottom of it. But I was snorkeling along this shelf. And on the right side, I could touch my feet down. And on the left side, I have no idea what's down there. And it was just such an overwhelming experience because on the one hand, I could see the incredible beauty of the coral just a few feet below me and the multicolored fish swimming and the incredible plant life and all the reality that I could behold in my present moment. And then in my other eye, I could see what was so far beyond what I could see. I had no idea what was even there. But the glimpse I had in my right eye of the incredible beauty of what's before me makes me trust in the infinity of that which I can't fully see. And this passage in Ephesians is inviting us to take a step out upon the water. And nobody can walk on water. But these gospel images that come up, possibility in the gospel is always about what's impossible. It's about walking on water. It's about resurrection. The solutions in the gospel are always beyond what you would have imagined. This is the faith we're invited into. And it's a little overwhelming for any individual, and that's why we're called to do it in faith community. That's why we're invited to do it in conversation. So over the next few weeks, we're going to continue the conversation of faith. Next week, we're going to look at change. We're going to talk about the God who makes all things new. Always making all things new. Holy God, we dare to step out upon the water. We dare to keep both eyes open. The one that is perceiving the beauty of this present moment and the great gift and the gratitude that we have for loved ones, for life, for gift, for community, for faith, for joy. And the other eye beholding eternity. And in the midst of all this, oh God, we trust you who made the water, you who made the coral, you who have created us, you who have created us with gifts beyond what we have even begun to tap into yet. God, we give you thanks for one another, that we can stand with one another when times get hard, when we're going through hard times, when we're grieving, when we're suffering. We give you thanks, God, that we can stand with one another, that we can be with one another during the hard times. And that we can still be with one another, God, as we emerge into the sunlight. Holy God, we give you thanks for the mystery and for your love and grace that accompanies us every step of the way. In Jesus' name, amen.